This might be one of the most compelling reasons to buy a Radiomaster radio today. This is the Radiomaster AG01 Gimbal, and before you ask, yes, you can get them in colors other than purple. And the reason this is so compelling is that it's a full metal CNC gimbal. The entire frame of the gimbal, you can see here, is made of metal. And that gives it a weight, a strength, a rigidity, and just an ultra premium feel that you don't get on the built-in gimbals in most radios. Not to say that the gimbals in radios like this Radiomaster Boxer are bad. They're good, but the AG01 gimbals have a certain premium feel, and I like to put them in my radios. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to put AG01 gimbals in this Radiomaster Boxer. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. No. I mean, we're going to put the gimbals in the radio. I'll try and think of stuff for you to learn. Mostly we're just going to put the gimbals in the radio. As always, before we work on the radio, we're going to take the battery out, and then we are going to open it up. And sorry to see that Radiomaster has shipped Phillips head screws with this radio. I believe that they switched to like M2 screws on the TX12 or the TX16. Oh well, not the end of the world, but I do prefer those. These are just a little easier to strip out and a little harder to deal with. And it looks like we're going to need to peel off these hand grips. Oh yeah, there's a little bit of a recession there, so clearly that's intended for us to pull off. Am I intended to pull this off as well? Oh, well, I did. Okay, and there's probably a couple more screws in there. Yes, I can see them in this hole and this hole. And now usually the radio will just split apart. I'm going to do this very carefully because I'm not sure if there are any plugs or wires going to the back shell. A well-designed radio will not have any plugs or wires going to the back shell. Oh, I'm about to, okay, there we go. We have cracked the seal. Warranty void. No, I'm sure it's not like that. Yeah, no wires or anything going to the back shell. That's very nice. And here we have the inside of the radio. Ooh, this is really nice that they've got it all on one board like this. Very, very nice. Here's the fan going to the 1-watt internal express LRS module. Fancy. Next, we're going to unplug the gimbals, and we've got one plug here. It looks like, is that the right one? Yes, it's just tucked away there. Oh, they're very nice how it's tucked away. So we got one plug here. We're going to just pull that off. And then we've got one plug on the other side, and we're going to do the same. And then we've got 4 screws holding each gimbal in place. 1, 2, 3, and it looks like 4. Oh, no, is that part of the gimbal? That looks like a part of the gimbal. No, I see. There's a little silver screw underneath there. Well, let's take it apart and see what happens. And these do look to be the same length as the screws that came out of the shell. In fact, they look like the same screws, so I'm going to keep them separate, but if you do mix them up, I think it'll be okay. And we can see that, yes, in fact, this black screw here is not holding the gimbal in. The actual screw is underneath here, but one of the great things about these gimbals is that they have screws on the front that let you adjust the tension, the up-down travel, and whether the throttle centers or not. And those screws pass through to adjust little levers and so forth on the inside of the gimbal. And this screw here seems to relate to this bar right here, which I'm guessing relates to whether the throttle recenters. Let's turn this screw right here, and as I do, you can see this bar right here is coming up, and this will probably act as a limit on that, I suppose. I don't know. Oh, so I'm loosening the spring tension on this spring right here. You can see that spring getting looser, and okay, so we've just made the spring tension much looser, whereas if we press down on that, now the spring tension is much tighter. And it looks like, yes, very clever. It looks like this screw is just there to keep you from screwing this out so far that it screws the bar all the way off, and then it just comes loose inside the gimbal. Nice. Very, very nice. Very thoughtful, Radiomaster. Look how asymmetrical these screws are. You see that they're not really, they're just kind of all over the place. I'm really glad I showed you this because somebody left a comment on my previous video about the Boxer saying, they're asymmetrical. It just shows how shoddy the workmanship on this radio is, that they couldn't even take the time to make the screws like be in a nice square and be symmetrical. And it's like, do you understand that they are going into the gimbal and they're pushing on little parts of the gimbal to affect how the gimbal functions? It's like, they're not symmetrical for a reason. It's a very complicated little mechanism. Next, I'm going to identify which of these gimbals is the throttle and which one is the pitch roll stick. And obviously, the gimbals can be adjusted, the centering or not centering any way you like it. But when you order them, you can order them in a set of one throttle non-centering and one centering, just for convenience. And I've always noticed that the feel of the Radiomaster AG01 gimbal is so, it's got this like damped, lubricated feel, and I just figured out why. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on camera, but can you see? Yeah, there it is. Can you see like right here where this curved piece makes contact with the throttle tension bar? They've lubricated it. There's lubrication on there. There's a heavy sort of grease. Radiomaster actually used to ship these gimbals with a little tin of lubricating grease, and they had to stop doing it because it was, I think I heard a rumor that it was making problems at customs, and so they stopped doing it. But I still have this, it's this really heavy, thick, almost taffy-like grease that gives kind of a damped resistance to moving the throttle without having the ratcheting mechanism there, which you certainly don't want for multi-rotors. It's a smooth, it's damped, it has this really, really nice feel. And I've done it to all my gimbals. It's great that they're shipping them pre-lubricated. It's fantastic. And I should say, by the way, the same is true for, well, I adjusted it, that's why it's floppy. The same is true for these non-CNC gimbals that came with the Boxer. So this is my throttle, and it's going to go on the left, which is actually the right, because we're looking at it from the back side, and I can't remember which way is up or which way is down, but the good news is that the mounting holes are actually offset, so you shouldn't be able to install it wrong. Oh yeah, I do remember. This little screw here was in the upper side here, so yeah, this is the right way to mount it. And the gimbals come with their own set of mounting screws and a spare set of springs. I'm not actually sure if those are higher, sometimes gimbals will come with higher tension springs if you want more spring tension. I'm not sure about that. But it does look like the springs or the screws are the same length as the stock ones, so I'm just going to reuse the stock ones. When you're screwing these in, don't go bonkers with this, with making them too tight. It's just a plastic standoff, a plastic, I don't even know what to call it, little column, a little threaded column. And you will strip it out if you go bonkers. I am super impressed with the care and design that has obviously gone into this board. All of the plugs are labeled, stick left, stick right, and RF port. And even the screw holes are labeled, which, if you think about it, when you're assembling the radio, like, boom, right there on the circuit board, screw goes here. When you're doing the quality check, it's easy to look and say, okay, there should be a screw in every hole marked screw. And those sound like obvious things, but when you're making hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many radios, it really, little things can go wrong. And little steps like this show that Radiomaster is really thinking about how to make their radios well. Almost all of the settings for these gimbals, the spring tension, centering, and the up and down limits are adjustable from the screws on the front of the gimbal. But there is one setting for the throttle that you're going to want to adjust while you've got the radio open. And you'll see these two bars right here on the back side of the throttle. One of them controls whether the throttle has a sort of a ratcheting. You'll feel little rough ratcheting steps, and most multi-rotor pilots would advise you, including me, would advise you that you don't want this for multi-rotors. You might not even want it for planes, but sometimes for planes you might want little ratchet steps to let you set the throttle and hold it there. Multi-rotor pilots are constantly making very small throttle adjustments, and we don't want to feel that ratcheting. The tension of the throttle is set by this second inner bar, which presses down and makes it stiffer. And you can adjust that if you want. It'll adjust the sort of looseness or tightness feel of the throttle. You just don't want it so loose that the throttle might move on its own, but other than that, it's just a matter of personal preference. Just screw that screw in or out to add or remove tension. I'm going to go ahead and tuck these wires right back where they were. Seemed like a good place to have them so they don't get pinched as I'm putting the radio back together, for example. Coming out the side here. Oh, that's at a risk of getting pinched. If it's coming out the side here, we don't want that, so let's try and tuck that like down this way a little bit. Yeah. It should be ready to put back together. I love when radios are designed this way. They come apart super easily without all the switches falling out and everything. If you go back to like the Taranis X9D, the top switches would fall out if you didn't sort of hold them in place when you open the radio. I think the QX7 was the first radio I remember that really got this right, where the back of the radio would just lift off. And then for the side grip, it looks like there's a lip I'm gonna have to figure out, and I'm gonna have to make sure that like the left goes, oh, they're marked left and right. Fantastic. There's an R and an L on the inside. So great. It's gonna make it easy. Figure out which way is up and which way is down. This is the right. And it looks like there's just like a little gap here that it goes into. Oh. Oh yeah, that's nice. And then come around here and these little tabs go in. Right here. That seems like a much better design than on the TX16S, which can sometimes the side grips can be a little bit loose or a little, you know, not quite fit. There, I ruined it. I'm also going to be putting different stick ends on here. I like the Specimen stick ends from thumbgrippies.com. These are actually pretty nice stick ends. They're not bad. They're kind of like the Specimen stick ends. I kind of like that. But I'm going to be putting, I already ordered them, they're just not here today. If you're interested in learning more about the difference that stick ends can make, it's not just cosmetic. They really change the whole way you interface with the radio. I did a roundup of some popular stick ends, and I'll put a link to that down in the video description. Don't forget that every time you change your gimbals, you need to calibrate the radio, and you might be calibrating your radio wrong. There's a common mistake people make when calibrating their radio. I've got a video about the right way to calibrate your radio. I'll put a card on screen about that, as well as a link down in the video description below. And if you're not sure whether the $130 for these AG01 gimbals is worth it or not, I did a full review of them. I'll put a card on screen and a link in the video description below. See you there.